Okay. So today I will be talking about a specific case study in Kaz Mountains, where we compare the biodiversity in two different agricultural types. One of them is organic and the other one is conventional farming type. As I told you before, this is the result of a Habitat project where a lot of people put a contribution to, which actually is a big project, and different biodiversity experts were in this project. And so this is one of the case studies in the olive groves, because we think that olive groves are providing a good habitat for quite a lot of species, including birds, butterflies, mammals, and plants, and so on. So we asked the question if organic and conventional matters in terms of conserving biodiversity. And first of all, I'll talk about a little bit about what is organic farming, because we have this convention, the idea that organic farming is always better than conventional farming. But let's look at the definition of organic farming. Organic farming has an integrating farming system that strives for sustainability, the enhancements of soil fertility and biological diversity, while prohibiting synthetic pesticides, antibiotics, synthetic fertilizers, genetically modified organisms, and growth hormones. So this is the definition of organic farming, and organic farming has big no's when it comes to synthetic pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, GMOs, nanomaterials, and plant growth regulators and such. Sometimes some pesticides are allowed, which is pyrethrin and rotenone, which are natural products of plants, and you can apply this with limited quantities if you're dealing with pest problem. And some synthetic substances are also allowed, like copper sulfate and elemental sulfur, but they have really strict rules on application. So when we talk about organic farming, we're mostly talking about this within these rules, and these are the requirements for getting the certificate for organic farming. It's basics. So there are some farms who are doing more than this, like applying more ecological methods, and there are some farms, they are just strictly very similar looking and conventional and only doing this. So how do we define if an organic farming is environmentally more friendly? And there are many studies about how organic versus conventional farming influenced biodiversity. And this is one of the most cited, although old, it's the most cited meta-analysis. And they combine together a lot of researches of comparing organic versus conventional farming. And what they found is that very contradictory results, like 30% of the organic farms had higher species richness, but 16 of them showed negative effect on organic farming on species richness. And in 50% of the organic farms, organisms were more abundant, but the results were highly variable between studies and organisms group. And organic farming often has positive effects on species richness and abundance, but their effects are likely to differ between organisms groups and landscapes. So looking at this very highly variable results, we decided that we would like to see how organic farming is influencing our biodiversity, and if there is any difference in olive groves in Ayvacık, Çanakkale. So we have three basic questions I will be talking about that. Of course, the project had more questions, but I will be talking about those three today. How organic and conventional farming differ. What makes it different in different farms in Çanakkale, and how the plants, butterflies, or birds are influenced. We also looked at the spiders, but I didn't include it into this talk. And also, can we recommend applicable changes in farming methods to mitigate impact on biodiversity? Those are the three questions I'll be discussing today. First of all, let's look at our study area. This is the Çanakkale, Ayvacık Çanakkale map. And on the left you see all the olive groves. This is a Korean 2012 map, and all the red spots are farms, olive groves, in different parts of the Çanakkale region. And on the left, you can see that organic farming certificates as by the year of 2015. And these are the maps we produced using the organic farming locations. As you can see, the olive groves are very dominant here. And if you have been ever in this area, you should remember most probably that wherever you look, there are olive trees from seaside till the mountains. So most of the areas are covered with olive trees, and there's a lot of actually organic plantations around the regions. And what we did was we selected some sites. First of all, we decided that we wanted to sample biodiversity in big areas. So we set a size of 6 hectares of the minimum size of organic farms, because there are lots of organic farms, as you can see here, but those are tiny areas and their edge is so big that the influence of organic farm might not be influencing biodiversity directly. So we selected big areas. First, we selected very big, large organic farms, bigger than 6 hectares. And looking at those, we selected conventional farms, and using a GIS analysis, we selected very similar topography sites. Distance to the sea, the altitude, impact of roads, impact of cities, all those things are included in the GIS analysis, so that we selected very similar conventional farms to organic farms. And we also wanted to sample the natural areas in that region. But our problem was that within the altitudinal range of olive groves, very few natural habitats were left. So what happened is that since 1960s, there was a big expansion of olive groves, and quite a lot of natural habitats were converted to olive groves, and very few and very limited natural areas were left. But we could find 3. Our aim was to find 6, so that at least 6 sites from each part would be present, but we could see 3 natural habitats. So you can see those 3 are these 2, and then there's another one here. These are the natural sites, which are very in between maquis and shrubs or pine forests. But the others are mostly, the blue ones are conventional farmings. It was easier to find big conventional areas. So we found 9 conventional farming, and then we had 6 organic farming sites. So with the GIS analysis, we selected sites that are similar in topography so that we can actually match and see what's happening. So these were the habitats we selected. For example, this is the organic farm 1. We placed 3 transects within to sample biodiversity. We also visited the area very frequently. We also had surveys with the farmers to understand what kind of farming they were doing. So we had in total of 48 transects, and we had standard butterfly count method every 2 weeks. Within the peak season, we visited the sites and counted butterflies. Our bird team made transect counts and then observed birds, recorded birds, and then our plant team, they made quadrats and recorded the plant species. And this is an example again. The previous farm was owned by 1 person, but for the conventional site, we don't have that luxury actually. Quite a lot of similar sites had many owners. So you can see the example in here. This is 1 site we selected, but there are many farmers that are doing different things in conventional sites. So this was one of the difficulties we had. And this is the flow chart of organic versus conventional olive groves. You can see that our study area is a farmland, and there are olive trees in the soils, and then pruning is one of the things they do. And major difference between organic versus conventional was the herbicide application. Herbicide is heavily used in this region in some of the farms, of course, not in all of them. Also, one of the difference was that pesticide use was very limited both in organic and conventional farms, except for one specific farmer. But other than that, organic and conventional farming actually had very similar structures, except two things. First of all, it's herbicide use. In organic farming, we didn't record any herbicide use. In conventional farming, there was herbicide application. And fertilizer use is that organic farmers use manured and organic certified fertilizers. So it was used as the major fertilizing effect. And then for the conventional users, conventional farming, manure is applied as well as synthetic fertilizers. But other than that, in terms of pruning, irrigation, and even fungicide, the old conventional farmers were using copper sulfate, not synthetic fungicides. So more or less, when you look at that, those two types had similarities in terms of application. And we did surveys with the farmers, and we found out that the major difference appears in the percentage of herbicide application. 16% of the conventional farmers were using herbicides as a way of weed management. Whereas the major weed management system, weed or soil management system, was plowing or tillage in the organic farming. And these are the different sites, and sometimes, as I saw before, show you before, one farmer owned all the site, and they were doing very similar thing in the same area. Sometimes there were two different sites where this site was doing very similar difference from that. For example, this site was applying herbicide, and this site was doing tillage in the conventional sites. Sometimes what we had, this was our major difficulty, some of the sites had many owners, and every owner did a different thing in terms of managing their weeds. And this, we thought that might be a good way to measure it. Maybe the mosaic structure of applying different methods in the same area might have positive impacts on the biodiversity. So we had different sites with different applications. So here I will be mostly talking about the management of soil and the weeds, because that was the major difference in both sites. And this is what I'm talking about when we're mentioning tillage or plowing. It's a very common application used both in organic farming and conventional farming. And it doesn't matter how steep the slopes are. You can see that how slope is so steep, and even those areas are heavily plowed by animals. This time they're doing it with animals, or sometimes in the plowing, they plow the whole area without letting a single vegetation grow. This is like a really heavy and deep plowing example in one of the sites. And also there are other types within our studies, like for example, this person only plowed around the tree, nowhere else. They left certain vegetation in some places, and this person let the natural vegetation grow in strips. So what we did was we recorded the percentage of plowing in each site and added this as a variable in our analysis. Because there will be a very big difference between this habitat and this habitat in terms of biodiversity. And when we're talking about herbicide use, that is also very variable within the habitat as well. And sometimes you walk into the olive grove and this is what you see. All the plants are all of a sudden killed with the herbicide application. And by the time this study was carried out, Roundup was the most common herbicide, which is a glyphosate, and which is currently banned now. And you can see actually many different ways of applying it. See, you can see that trees circle was only applied by herbicide, but they didn't spray any herbicides here. But sometimes they're applying to the whole field. This is a very steep, slopey olive grove. As you can see, even the trees are looking really sad and unhealthy because the soil layer is gone after 3 years of constant application of herbicides, and all the plants are dead, and no plants, no vegetation, no soil is left because of the erosion after the herbicide application. So we have these, but there is also very different applications within the farming type. For example, when you look at this graph, you can see that conventional farmers apply herbicides, like number of transects in each transects we're talking about, and then they do plow, and then after that they apply herbicide. And some of the conventional farmer, when you look at this number of transect, a huge amount of them is only doing plowing, which is very similar to organic as well. And quite a lot of the conventional farmers are doing nothing. Just they leave the area as is, and they don't do any soil management or vegetation cover management. So when you look at the organic farmers at the same time, quite a lot of them are doing the plowing or tillage, and some of them are just doing nothing. So when you look at this application types, you can see that you can expect some of the similarities within the between conventional and organic farming methods. So this will actually say that it's not easy to say that all conventional farmers are applying herbicide or all organic farmers are doing plowing. Actually, it is all very mixed. And what we did was, as I told you before, we recorded the cover of area that was influenced by the vegetation, plowing or herbicide application. So this is the percentage of area plowed, and this is the grass and shrub cover, which we independently measured. So as you say that the amount of herbicide and plowing increase, the grass and shrub cover decrease, and there's a linear relationship with that. And we will use this as a measure of understanding how certain communities are responding to these changes. And first of all, plant communities. We were very surprised that plant communities were very rich under the olive groves. We recorded total number of 272 species. Organic groves had 188 species, and conventional groves had 200 species. So this is a huge number. This is very high diversity in terms of plant diversity. So when we're talking about the word weed, we're talking about at least 200 species living under the olive grove. So this is a huge number. And when you look at the natural sites, there's 140 species. One reason is that these are settled communities. So it is like maquis or pine forests. That's why they're actually good settled communities, and we expect, of course, fewer species. On the other hand, we also had limited number of natural areas. We only had 3 natural areas, so that might also be decreasing the species number. But considering all of that, this is a huge diversity in olive farms. We're talking about agricultural areas, but these agricultural areas are providing habitat for quite a number of species. And what we found is that when you look at the NMDS results, these are the natural areas. They're very different. These are very different from the farm sites, and the farm sites did not actually differ much. I mean, when you look at the O's and K's are all mingled together. So it means that community structures were not very different. And K8, by the way, is the site where extreme herbicide application was used, and then the topsoil was gone. It's one of the pictures. So, but when you look in general, they are actually, you cannot separate one farming time from the type from the other in terms of their plant community structure. So what is influential is the soil management type. Community structure is not influenced by farming type, but is heavily influenced by soil management and the management of the shrub communities. So presence of the and height of shrub communities were very influential in our analysis, and deep tillage and the size of the area plowed is influential, and herbicide use and the size of the herbicide area applied was more influential. So I'm giving brief information. I'm not going to dive into more detailed analysis, but if you have questions, we can discuss that too. And let's talk about the birds in the olive groves. And here's the total number of bird records were 2,266, and with total of 75 species recorded within the olive groves. And this also tells that it is a huge community of birds. These agricultural areas are not only for us, but a lot of birds are using it. And the birds are actually different in fall season, winter, breeding season, and these are the number of individuals we recorded the presence of breeding. So 34 species during fall, 33 species winter in this region, 62 species were recorded in the breeding season in this area, and 45 of these 62 was breeding within the farming habitats, and they were using it as their nests. But when you look at the richness and compare it with natural areas, we see that conventional and organic farming had lower species richness compared to natural areas, as well as abundance was lower compared to natural areas. And the most common species are listed here. They're given their scientific numbers, except the graded in the beginning column. I do not know the common names of these birds, but these are the top 10 bird species. If there's a bird person in between us, maybe they can tell the common species of that. So this is a general snapshot picture of what we found. So organic farming looks a little bit high here, but it is not statistically really significant. And when we look at the butterflies, we have a very similar picture too. We found that our organic, conventional and natural sites had very similar number of species, but definitely natural sites. These are statistically significant natural sites. Number of species per transect is definitely higher, but organic and conventional didn't differ much, even though there is a little bit of high number in the organic sites. We also measured, when it comes to butterflies, we measured the habitat use. So if a species is feeding or laying an egg, or the caterpillars are growing in the region, we recorded it separately. And in that case, natural site got even higher, and the organic conventional difference changed a little bit, but still not very statistically significant results are obtained here. But definitely you can see a little bit of decline in some of the conventional sites. But again, this might be because all the mingled applications of butterfly, between conventional and organic. And we also compared the ground cover with butterflies. So if we protect the ground cover in the organic, in the farms, in the olive groves, can we protect the butterflies, the first level in the food chain? And how much of the area should be plowed or tilled, or maybe if necessary herbicide applied, if we can protect the species at certain levels. So you can see that this is a grass and shrub cover. Instead of this time herbicide and tillage application, we measured the grass and shrub cover as percentage. And we put the graph against number of species in terms of butterflies. And you can see that there is, as the grass and shrub cover increased, number of species increased in kind of a linear manner. And but when we look at the number of individuals, which is a measure of abundance, you can see that here a little bit square root here. So this actually, the actual graph is like this. It's a kind of a growing like this. So as the number of grass and shrub cover increase and get closer to 100%, the number of butterflies increase very tremendously. So we can see that around 80%, 70% threshold of left ground vegetation, a huge number of butterfly can still be protected within the farmland areas. And we also looked at the habitat use, and we can see that the number of species using the habitat, butterflies using the habitat, and the number of species, number of individuals using the habitat increase again with a similar fashion. So, general conclusions. First of all, I told about how organic and conventional farmers differ in Turkey, but in Europe, conventional farmers, when you talk about conventional farmers, the perception is a little bit different. So here in Kaz Mountains, conventional and organic grows are not structurally very different. But if you look at the European conventional farms, you can see much bigger lands, much younger trees, more separated, more heavily application of herbicides or more machinery involved here. And if you look at the map, Google Earth pictures of general conventional grows in Turkey versus in Europe, you can see that these are more mechanized farms. Whereas when you look at the Turkish conventional farms, when you look at it, and there is not a major difference in terms of how they look. Only you can recognize that organic farms, conventional farms with herbicide application, if you find the traces of herbicides and all. So structure of the olive groves still provide a lot of habitat for wildlife in Turkey, in Kaz Mountains. And as I mentioned before, how we do certain applications, for example, weed and soil management, or how we're treating our hedgerows and sites are more influential than the certificate of that grow. For example, you can hear, for example, this is a conventional site. This is a hedgerow. There was a long hedgerow with shrubs and beautiful trees and lots of different, and then after they burned the area. You can see the traces of the ashes. So these are very important wildlife habitats within the olive groves, and their protection is very important in terms of supporting biodiversity. And as I said before, a number of species are increasing with the presence of shrubs. So protecting the hedgerows and not actually applying herbicide to it, even within the conventional sites, help a lot increase within the farm ecosystems. And we have, of course, other recommendations as a result of this project. We definitely say that herbicide application should be avoided, not because of the methods measured, but others measured. One of the reasons is the ecotoxicity and negative impacts of soil flora and fauna and microflora. We do recommend that no or low tillage agriculture should be promoted, and deep and widespread tillage should be avoided. And in some cases, in our results, deep and widespread tillage was as bad as herbicide application. So this is a major finding of our study. And if we really, really think that no tillage is not possible, maximum 30% of the surface area should be plowed to do the plowing measure. And we actually saw that quite a lot of people are actually only plowing certain areas and leaving the natural vegetation growing. These were the highest and richest areas. And natural vegetation, I told before that there were 272 species recorded in the whole area, plant area, and quite a lot of them are locally used. For example, there is a local asparagus species that only grows in Kaz Mountains, and people collect and eat them. Kuşburnu, kuşkonmaz, and they do sell this in the local farms. It's actually a very important species for in terms of diet, and in the local farms you can see that species. And there's Series-3, if you've heard of it. This is a very commercially, people are collecting this and making baskets from this. And when you apply herbicide, we are losing all of them. Lapine and chirishoto, this is a local medicinal plant, and they eat as well. Also, there are many species that human beings are using either locally or commercially. And there are actually, among those 272 species of plants, there are quite a lot of them is legumes, which are species like Trifolium, and they increase the nitrogen content of the soil. They're natural fertilizers, and when we remove them, we are actually losing a lot in terms of ecosystem services provided by these plants. And usually what we also recommend is that for management, we use flocks of goats or sheep. That should be sheep. And in many places we saw that people are, even though legally it's not allowed, people sometimes let their animals naturally walk there and graze the wheat, which is an amazing way of managing the plants. Unfortunately, we couldn't add this to our statistical analysis as there was only one person doing it, but even the diversity was really high. Also, cutting the plants and living on the ground is another good method of protecting biodiversity and enriching the soil. So, thank you very much. I hope I didn't talk too much or too fast. Thank you for listening to me. And I'm happy to get questions if you have any.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting, very inspiring talk. And it was very clear without much jargon. So this was also nice for our audience who have, I think, diverse backgrounds here. I mean, the study is very important to show because for many decades it has been claimed or argued that protected areas are the sole management conservation policy, right? So, but here we see there's tremendous biodiversity, amount of biodiversity here in olive groves in Kaz Dağları at least, and there is some potential, right? And on the other hand, there are also some small changes perhaps that could be made with respect to hedgerows and so on, which could actually amplify the already existing biodiversity very quickly and very easily. So without much certification, without much management, I don't know, policy making and so on. So it was very, very useful for future studies as well, I think. So we open the floor for questions now. Anyone who wants to talk, comment, or ask some questions, please raise a hand or jump in. Okay, I see two now. First Irmak, then Hakan, our student. Thank you very much.
Hello. Can you hear me clearly, by the way?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, thank you for this nice presentation. I just want to make one point clear. Like, to be honest, it was surprising for me to see the plant species are high in even conventional farmings and organic farmings than the natural habitats, while the birds and butterfly species are lower. So I was thinking logically they are pollinators. So if they are low, the plant diversity would be low as well. But is it because like some of those are used as food sources? So like does it also counted in the biodiversity of the plants, or what was the reason? Or do you have an explanation for this difference maybe?
Yes, the numbers look low actually, but if you compare plants with butterflies, yes, it's a low number. But if you compare butterflies in certain habitats versus growths, it's actually not low. It's actually a good diversity for a certain amount of time. 75 species of birds is not bad at all when you talk about a natural area, or what was the number of butterflies? I don't remember, but it is not a low number. When you think of the whole England has 57 species, our olive groves tops than that compared to, so yes, thank you for pointing that out, because I should mention that olive groves are actually rich in all species groups. So we don't compare plants versus butterflies, because plants are always going to be high in number. They're the primary producers, of course, and their number will be higher, and diversity will be higher compared to birds all the time. But when you look at compare the birds within this site versus other areas, these are not low numbers, especially compared to some other agricultural areas. Would that answer your question?
I answered some part of it, but I was more curious about like why the plant diversity is less in natural habitats while it's more in olive groves, no matter.
Okay. It is again the management type. Organic farming mostly concentrated on deep tillage, and quite a lot of organic sites till the areas very heavily. And conventional farms, on the other hand, left a lot of patches. So in that case, different applications created some mosaic and let the plants survive. On the other hand, and the conventional versus organic farming in terms of bird and butterfly, the mean values looked a little bit low, but they weren't statistically different. So I cannot really say that bird numbers were lower in conventional than organic, because I couldn't find a statistical differences. Only their means were a little bit lower. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. First of all, thank you for the presentation. These are like very interesting topics. I usually do not see presentations about these types of things, so it's always fun for me. But one thing I wanted to ask about was when it came to your conclusions, there was a figure there. I believe it was like 30% lower in plowing. Was it correct? I wanted to ask if there was some kind, if this was like a general ballpark figure, or if there is some idea behind like trade-offs between, let's say, agricultural output versus what kind of biodiversity we're trying to protect and what have you. Like, is there a specific threshold or optimization that you used?
We were just using the threshold in this graph. I actually cheated and did not show you the everything, but I mentioned you that this is a square root, and then this is actually a linear line looking, but actually actual picture is like this. And this is exactly 30% is exactly like this after that the graph grows. So there is where the exponential graph starts. We said that, yeah, you should not plow more than that.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one more hand I see from Hakan Bey.
Sorry. Any other questions? We have one in the chat box, but we can also perhaps prioritize first if there's someone raising the hand. Otherwise, I'm gonna just read it and then let's see how you would respond. In general, the use of chemicals such as herbicides, fungicides is almost a necessary application against many pest and pathogen attacks that affect crop yield. Have you had any data or observations about what kind of results are obtained in terms of yield quality, quantity in organic versus conventional agricultural areas? I would appreciate if you could answer the situation in Europe for the same question, since the conventional versus organic systems seemed quite different in Turkey and Europe, as you shown. Besides, why organic versus conventional systems do differ so much in comparison to Turkey and Europe? That's a longish question, but I don't know. I mean, the first one is about yield, and maybe you can start with that, and then we can continue.
In case we did actually in a study, we did a lot of things. We measured one of my students recently finished a thesis on developing the data. We measured all kinds of environmental impacts, even the carbon footprint and eutrophication kind of stuff. We measured all of these, and of course, part of it was yield. And our data suggests that organic versus conventional agriculture in Turkey does not differ in terms of yield in this region. So that is one finding. So organic farmers are producing as much as conventional farming. So this is one result of our study. So yield in this specific study is equal. Second question was
why this diversity, this difference between Europe and Turkey in terms of organic versus conventional?
In Turkey, in Kaz Mountains, all these farmers are actually traditional farmers. They have the land from their ancestors, their parents, their grandparents, and they continue this method. What makes them different is that if they apply for an organic certificate and start doing the organic rules, stop using the pesticides and herbicides and synthetic fertilizer, they become organic. So it is actually the similar structure. There are traditional farmers, but all of a sudden, a couple of them decide to take an organic certificate and follow the organic certificate path. In Europe, usually big companies or buy farms and then they start doing the olive production from scratch. Of course, there are examples to that, but they usually buy a land, they plow the whole area, and they choose smaller varieties and they plant it distant and they use heavy machinery. And of course, there are differences to that, but usually it is what it is. And they usually select varieties in a way that with heavy irrigation and application of machinery and inputs, synthetic inputs, they try to get more output from that. Did I answer the questions?
Okay, thank you very much for these questions. Hilal Özkılınç was the person asking this. I think that was more or less the answering. Hakan, was it a follow-up? I missed it, sorry. I thought you were like just forgetting to lower your hand.
I had one other question. Maybe it's not as relevant because I kind of had an answer for it, but let me ask regardless. I mean, when we think about like the yields of both, herbicide use farming and non-herbicide, more organic, I suppose, farming having the same like output in terms of yield. Is there like, did the farmers there give any specific reason as to why like this might be the case? Is it because the areas that we're looking at perhaps have like lower soil nutrient content or something, and perhaps using herbicides, you like you relatively increase the output in that region so that it rises to the level of areas where with organics you have high output or things like that. Like normally I would expect if you're going to spend extra cost on getting all of these extra chemical additions in terms of your farming application, there would be a some type of return expected. So what is sort of the change there that you've observed?
My connection got very unstable. And can you shorten the story? Ask again.
Very sure. Very shortly, I would say, what is the difference that herbicide use makes in these areas, considering the output is equivalent, right?
It is the time and it is the effort. People don't like grass cover there and all these weeds while collecting the olives. So and it's more costly to plow the area. So they think that there are only two options. And it's so easy to get a bucket of herbicide, put it and then spray. It's so time effective and it makes everything so clear. So it's a psychological thing actually, and the cost thing. And people do not like grass cover. They feel like the field should be like free of all these plants. It should be brown. And that's a weird psychological thing among farmers. And when one farmer, what happens in Turkey is that farmers don't do research. They hear it from their neighbors. They're like, oh, my neighbor did that, I'm going to do that too. And all of a sudden, all these things are becoming traditionally common without actually understanding the real impacts. Because we had one farmer, organic farmer, which we couldn't involve in later. They didn't plow or do use herbicide for 7 years and their production was normal. But after 7 years, they were like, oh, I have to do this. So they plowed the whole area. Why? Because psychologically they're uncomfortable that the soil was plowed. But what happens is that when you stop tillage, it takes 3 years for soil, at least 3 years for soil to heal. And after that healing process, it actually produces a lot of positive impact on the yield. So when you stop tilling, first you observe a dipping in yield. And then after that, 3 years later, when the soil is healed, soil microorganisms are healed and soil macroflora like worms and insects come back, all of a sudden soil's natural system heals, and then it gives a very similar idea without very similar yield in this region. So quite a lot of these things had to be scientifically compared. And I'm not a soil scientist or anything, but it has to be studied, and then these have to be told to the farmers that, are you doing this tillage or application of herbicides psychologically, or is it really giving any benefit to your farm or to your yield?
Thank you. We have two questions, Zeynep Demiray first and then Mehmet Can.
Thank you for this great talk. Could you hear me?
Yes.
My question is just about an image I saw in a slide of the examples of tillage. If you come to that, there were two images on the slide.
Okay. This?
Tillage, there were just olive tree, yes. On the left image, the pruning is just top of the tree, as I saw. Is it true? Is it related with, you see where the tillage is just around the tree?
Yes, yes.
The top of the nuts, the pruning is not around the tree, not the sides. So is there a specific reason, or it's just related with the productivity of the tree?
Yeah, the thing is, like, they believe that the roots of the tree are here under the trees. I don't know that word in English. Taç yapraklar, they say. So they apply even fertilizer around the circle. And they do, if they are plowing like this, partial plowing, they do it around it. And I think from here on, it's some other person's farm, and it didn't do plowing at all. So they are saying that anything you do around a circle around the tree is exact impact on the roots. So when they're plowing, partially plowing, they plow around the tree, and then of course when they're applying fertilizer, they give fertilizer not to whole field but around the plant. Is that your question?
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Yes, Mehmetcan.
Thanks for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. Actually, I would like to ask several dumb questions. One thing that intrigued me is that there was a huge difference in the number of species for butterflies birds between agricultural fields and natural habitats. And do farmers see birds as threat, put some efforts to keep them away from the fields?
not as threat, but species are different. Like there are certain species that prefer maquis and or pine forests. They are different in compared to agricultural areas. And I haven't actually shared the memos. We had a lot of memos in here too. We had photo traps, and we placed photo traps here. So animals choose their habitat according to the resources. And because olive groves are providing habitat, place for nesting and insects and all those things are provided within agricultural habitats. When you look at these pictures, it's only olive trees. And I'm talking about like this. If you have ever been to Çanakkale, you most probably observed this whole thing, like the olive tree, olive tree, olive tree, olive tree, see up until here. And there's a tiny bit of pine forest. And these are those 10 species that for using this habitat, most commonly were all generalist species where you would even see in parks. Whereas habitat specialist species, where they would use specific plants, specific trees, they would prefer natural areas. And even though these natural areas were very small and very decreasing in size, shrinking in size, those animals are preferring there because they're either pine related or natural vegetation related species. And same is true for the butterfly as well. I mean, the butterflies are also preferring a stable place for wintering, like their pupa requires a stable wintering site. So if you plow that area constantly, they hide in the soil to spend the winter, and all of a sudden in spring, you plow the area, and there are certain species which are not adapted to that is not going to live in the olive groves.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That was a very good question. It wasn't a dumb question at all.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Anyone want to ask?
I think there is one in chat.
Atakan, thanking for the presentation.
Thank you for having me.
In the meantime, perhaps I can ask one thing. We've seen that the olive groves are, even the conventional ones, are kind of heterogeneous, and they are not very intensively managed like it's like their European counterparts. So do you think that this would be an opportunity to have some more policies in place to support some sort of sustainable or biodiversity friendly or I don't know, wildlife friendly farming in Turkey? And what could you suggest? Which road should we go to push the policymakers a little bit more, central government or the local government, to push for more sustainable agriculture? Are there any opportunities that you see from your studies?
That's a tremendous opportunity, actually. That's amazing because, you know, our olive groves is a home for biodiversity, and we know that we're providing them, and certain applications are damaging them. So if we kind of implement very little things into the system to support this, which enhances as well the yield as well, it is actually possible to do that, and certain applications is very easily can be talked with farmers and applied. As I told previously, that quite a lot of those management things are either psychological. People think that it's going to be good. For example, removing hedgerows and pine trees within the ecosystem is definitely constantly being done because they think that it is a kind of, there's a competition between natural plants versus olives, but it is not the reality in the case. So if certain things like supporting hedgerows, decreasing the amount of pesticide use, replacing herbicide with grazing animals, such kind of things are not very difficult things. We don't have to change the whole system to add a little bit of diversity. So I think, and thank you for this question, it is a big opportunity.
Any other comments, questions, if anyone wants to jump in? We have a few more minutes, I think, if you have any comments. I think there is also much room for collaboration here, right? Between ecologists and between agricultural engineers, even perhaps social scientists. So it's very, very important that we consider these things in an interdisciplinary, even transdisciplinary way somehow. So if there are no other questions, I see some farmers here actually as well, but I don't know if they have any questions. So maybe.
Well, I actually shared it on my account yesterday, but during the pandemic, I had joined a meeting with farmers, big agricultural companies, and even the herbicide and pesticide producers. There was this big workshop organized by Society of Ecological Toxicity. And recently we published a report. We sometimes try to find an enemy in our mindset that big companies are evil or so kind of things. But what is becoming very obvious that biodiversity is an important part of agriculture, and everybody is actually wanting to increase the biodiversity. So I can put a link here if you can be a little bit patient for downloading that report, because I think if you're interested in, it has lots of things to do and short recommendations in terms of providing biodiversity in your own agricultural area. So let me just, yes, share this.
Great.
I think.
Yes, thanks for this.
Okay.
We have, I think, for one more question, that is now raising his hand, so we would be glad to hear from his perspective. Any comments or questions?
Hello. Hello. First of all, I'm very sorry because I was late. You see, I'm still in my car, and I stopped my car and I couldn't follow the whole presentation, but unfortunately, only the last part. I hope I can have a chance to follow it after this meeting. I mean, if you can download it somewhere. I have two comments. I'm living in Balıkesir Edremit region, and together with our friends, we are having an olive orchard. We are living in a village, and we are also pressing our own olive oil. I have two comments regarding the cover in the olive orchards, the crop covers. There are, yes, you are right, there are psychological reasons for that, and the farmers or the olive growers wants to have their fields empty all the time. But we tried to leave our grass or our plants in our olive fields, but we had sometimes we had really serious from the farmers because of the fire risk in the summertime. The last time we had rain in our region was at mid of June, and we are now in end of October, and since then we are living in an altitude of 280 meters, and we had only a few drops of rain, and the soil is very, very dry, and if there is also grass on it or very dry grass, let's say, I don't know how to say it, it's a big risk of fire. And the second thing is now we are close to harvesting times, and we always have our tente, our things that we put it under the olive trees, and traditionally we harvest our olives. And grass is not the only plant is coming out of the soil. Of course, there are ladan, for instance, or there are some oak types coming all the time, and they are growing in the field. And it's very, very difficult to cover your field for the harvesting when these multi-year plants are coming. And that's why also the villagers are plowing the fields, or they are cutting the oak trees from, or small oak trees, let's say, or ladan from the fields. Those are some realities from my region that I wanted to add only.
Yes, those are very true. I mean, it is very, people would like to collect the harvested olives very quickly. And yes, it is not only ladan, also very thorny plants are growing underneath, and those are the difficulties. But first of all, fire thing is like, that's why some places they use goats and cow and sheep for grazing underneath, and that's actually an important part of the ecosystem. We separated animals from plants, but they have to be together, and usually what decreases the fire risk is natural grazing. And what we recommended in our study is that in April, cut the trees and let them rot on the ground, and in the I think in June or May, they do the second hay cutting and leave the plants. So we don't want the very heavy, dense grass areas also for the fire risk as well. But this is also one thing, there should be mosaic. There should be some places where the plant needs to grow, and there should be some mosaic places where it needs to be cut. So I think this application of only plowing underneath the trees and leaving some plants aside for natural life is a way of doing it. That's why we recommended like 30% of the area being plowed or did some things is important. Also, you're very right, underneath the trees, if there is ladan or other stuff, which is perennial plants that are there, this is also providing, according to the literature, I didn't do this analysis, they are providing certain competition. But if you look at these pictures, and I'm sure you know these areas, hedgerows are not really stopping from trees to collect olives. I mean, there should be definitely certain type of shrublands, hedgerows to provide home for wildlife within the farms. So it is more or less how you organize it, or where you let those shrubs grow without interfering your ability to collect the plants. that's the one thing. In certain places in Europe, people are actually with rules and law and legislation. They're supposed to provide 10% of their habitat, for example, for natural life. So these are the kind of things that we can do. Yes, we want biodiversity, but we don't want our farmers to suffer either. Thank you for that contribution. That's very valuable.
Thank you very much. Yes, the farmer's perspective was even here. So it's a very fruitful presentation and seminar today. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Very quick ones, perhaps? Otherwise, if not, we can say thank you to Evrim Karaçetin and for all our participants today. And we hope to meet you next month. And you can watch everything in YouTube now. We have 3 of our seminars already uploaded, and it's going to be more in the coming months. Thank you very much for attending.